Good evening, everybody. My name's Simon from IOSH, and Jane and the team at the Southwest branch have very kindly asked me to deliver a session on morality and ethics. My background then, so a bit of introduction to me. So I spent a bit of time in the army when I was a young lad. I was a PE teacher there, so I didn't do any proper soldiering or anything. And then I went in the fire service. And I found that I very soon began to come across situations where I was having to make moral and ethical decisions. I started off as a firefighter at Moss Side Fire Station, which was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. You know, great group of people to work with and lots of fires, which is obviously why I joined the fire brigade. So I loved it. And I was there for a while, and then through various other stops along the way, I ended up as station officer at Manchester Central Fire Station. And so throughout the session today, I'm going to try and give you some practical experience that I've had both in the army and the fire service. And for about the last 17, 18 years, something like that, I've been managing director of IOSH. I've been involved in health and safety through the fire service, fire safety inspections, and obviously managing health and safety risks for many years now. I think I've been a chartered member since about 2006 or something like that. So I've got a reasonable understanding of health and safety. I've had an interest in philosophy for many years. I remember the first interview that I went for as a station officer. I remember talking about philosophy there, and about the importance of thinking and what the things mean. And so I think I probably had, as an adult, a lifelong sort of passion for philosophy and thinking about things. I believe that that unless we start to think philosophically, I think we lose the opportunity to be as good as we can be. That's what I believe. And about nearly 6 years ago now, I started my degree in philosophy and psychology through the Open University. And I must admit, it's just helped me so much. Thinking about how to formulate arguments, and thinking about how the brain works and what does this mean, things like that. I believe it just made me better at what I do. I'm not an expert, you know, I'm not a professor in anything, but I think I have a reasonable understanding about lots of different things because of my philosophical studies. So one of the things that I'd like to ask you right at the beginning, I'd like to get involved with a poll, and I'd like you to Ben's going to do the poll for you. He's going to send it out there. And as you can see there, do you think morals and ethics are relevant to health and safety? So it doesn't really matter what I think. What do you think? That's what I'm interested in to start out. So if you wouldn't mind having hopefully you know how to do this. Just say whatever it is that you, whatever answer you think. And we'll find out, it'll give us a good starting point to figure out your opinions about philosophy, whether you've even thought about it actually. You might not even have thought that morals and ethics is philosophy. You might have thought that's something different. Okay, so hopefully you're all doing your answers right now, and Ben's going to use a bit of wizardry, and he's going to give us some kind of an answer about what it is that you've said. So I think that'll pop up on the screen. So we've seen, of the people who are in the group, we've got a really high percentage there. 83% there have said that they think that it's very relevant. No, sorry, 75%, and 24% think it's relevant. So hopefully we're speaking to people who see the benefits of talking about this. And I'm sure you're all aware that IOSH themselves have recognised the importance of morality and ethics. And I think going forward, those of you who are members of IOSH or chartered or fellow, I think that'll have to be something that you're going to have a look at in the future. So what do we mean by ethics? What do we mean? Well, and there's a few of these definitions that we put along throughout the presentation. I don't know if you like a definition, but I do. Quite a few times I've seen on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever you see things, and people talk about ethics. Oh yeah, that's ethical. This is ethical, but I get the impression that actually not everybody understands it in the same way. So if we ever think about it, it's a grounding point. It's a starting point. So what does good mean? Are there some things which are always ethical? Are there some things that are objective and it's not about opinions? Are other things about opinions? Well, I think this is unethical, but I think that's okay. Is it about our opinions, or is it fixed? Are there some things that actually are just unethical or wrong? So I'm not so sure what any of you what studies you've done or what reading you've done, but once you start looking at the field of ethics, it's quite a big subject, ethics and morality. And we're not going to get involved in talking about things like cultural relativism and meta-ethics and moral realism and things like that. We're not going to do that. Today, we're going to stick to 3 common models, ethical models, which hopefully will be useful. And then we're going to finish off, towards the end, we're going to have a look at any moral duties that we may have within the workplace. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to start off with virtue ethics. So let's have a little look at that. So there's a little definition for you there. Okay. So the thing about virtue ethics is, it's not really telling you what is right and what's wrong. It's not saying, well, you can't do this or you can't do that. It says, well, basically, if you've got the right kind of a character, if you've got a virtuous character, you will be able to decide for yourself. You don't need someone to tell you that this is right or that's wrong. And virtue ethics started originally in ancient Greece. So I'm not sure if any of you have ever seen this painting before, by Raphael, and the chap with the beard, the big beardy kind of guy, that's Plato, and the guy next to him is Aristotle. And I'm sure you're all aware that Plato was a student of Socrates, who's also one of these names of Greek philosophy that are extremely influential and have been for literally thousands of years. If you think these people were coming up with their conclusions and thinking about things around 2,400 years ago, so a long time ago. And what were they talking about? Well, Plato started off by looking at what he called cardinal virtues, things that were fundamental to be a good citizen of Athens. And so the idea behind it is that as a good, if we can get everybody in Athens to be a virtuous person, then it will make Athens a great place to live for everybody. So it wasn't about the state, it was about the individual. And it was about practical wisdom. It was about, and he was saying that, you know, we can only really gain practical wisdom through experience. There was no real right or wrong, and it's agent-centered, and they call it teleological. So it's up to you, really, whether something is right or something is wrong. Aristotle said, you are what you repeatedly do. So if we do things over and over again, we behave virtuously over and over again, then it means that we will be virtuous throughout our lives. And Aristotle built on the cardinal virtues. He's talking about humility, righteousness, courage, which was also one of the ones that Plato had. He was also talking about self-righteousness as well. So these are characteristics that you should have if you're going to be virtuous. And if you're going to be virtuous, your behaviour would in turn be ethical, according to Aristotle. One of the things that he also talked about is that virtue is attained through proper functioning. So if you wanted to be a virtuous knife, you need to be able to cut things. if you wanted to be a virtuous cup or hand warmer, as it says there, then you need to hold your cups of coffee or whatever it is that you've got in there in order to fulfill your purpose. Now, when you look at that in terms of health and safety, and if we see ourselves as, for us to be proper functioning, we would perhaps use a term which I'm sure a lot of you know and probably use regularly, and that is competent. So to function properly as a health and safety person, and to have proper virtues, then we need to make sure, according to Aristotle, that we're brave, that we're courageous, that we're honest and we're truthful. Now, I do lots of different things, training and anything from leading safely to whatever, loads of different types of things like that. I also do quite a lot of consultancy and support and mentoring. And over the years, I've come across quite a few health and safety officers who, having a conversation with them, and they're going through a real struggle. They've got a real issue because they might do an accident investigation and they really want to say that, you know, there are root causes, that the senior management have failed to invest in this, or they've done that, or they haven't done this, or whatever. But they have a real issue with that because they know if they put something, somebody may come back to them, a senior manager, or somebody might question that. I found that myself. I was doing a behavioural programme for a business, and I had to go to the boards of directors and say the findings of the programme. And you know, there was a couple of them there because they felt that I was attacking them, and they were really, you know, quite sort of forthcoming in their disagreement with what I was saying. I didn't say anything without evidence, of course, and I showed them what the evidence was, and it really bothered me afterwards. I remember thinking about it before I went. Oh no, what if they say this? What if they say that? And I think at the time I was brave, but it wasn't easy. And we've also got to think about honesty. I was talking to the chap who's set this up today, Ben. He's our technical wizard, and we were talking about being honest. So I said, well, do you think it's right that you should be honest? And he said, well, sometimes, because sometimes if you're too honest, then you might make people feel uncomfortable. And I mean, and sort of thinking about what he said, I mean, I think the world would be quite a tricky place if you told everybody the truth all the time, wouldn't it? Humility. Now, I find that fascinating, humility. Working with lots and lots of different health and safety people, and you see people on LinkedIn and various people you meet at conferences and stuff. And do you know what? How good are we as an industry at saying, I don't know. Do you know what? I tried that, but I don't think it worked. Could we be better at that? I know I can improve, definitely. Other things that, and there are other virtues in the list that we've got there that Aristotle was talking about. Was talking about proper ambition. For Aristotle, you never stop trying to be more virtuous. You never stop learning. You never stop trying to improve. You just got to keep going and going and going, and it never ends. And I quite like that one as well, magnificence. I like to see health and safety people, managers, or whoever they are, as being magnificent. Okay, lots of the things we do, it's not like rescuing people or whatever, because the things that we did, it never happened. So, but I think it's quite a magnificent profession. Maybe I'm biased. Okay, and when he was talking about the virtues, he was saying that right down the middle, we have this what's called the golden virtue, the golden mean. But we have to be careful that we don't slip into the vices. So the vices would be deficiency, so we wouldn't be courageous, or we would be less honest. But on the other hand, we don't want to be, another vice is to excess. So brutally honest, overly courageous, putting yourself at danger, and etc. So he was looking for this balance, and it seems to me quite a reasonable approach. So we're talking about ethics starting with an individual. And I'm not sure what model IOSH will look at. Maybe they'll look at this model. Maybe they'll look at different models. I don't know. And if we can do this, if we can be virtuous, if we can constantly learn, if we can, the more we're virtuous, the more virtuous we become, we reach this place, or we reach this state called eudaimonia. And we might have heard of it and think of it in terms of well-being, perhaps. Well, some of you may think that well-being is a relatively recent phrase. It isn't. I mean, 2,500 years ago-ish. So that was quite a long time ago. And so what Aristotle was saying was, if we be the best that we can be and continually try and do it, we will live a good life and we will get the benefits out of that. A just life. Moving on, we're going to have a look at another branch of ethics now called deontological ethics. And so the idea about this is, this is about some things being right and some things being wrong. And we have an obligation to always do or not do some things. So you can see how that differs between virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is not about absolute right or absolute wrong. It's about the way you go about things. Okay, so looking at this in a bit more depth, you may have heard of a chap, a German philosopher called Immanuel Kant. And Immanuel Kant, he coined a phrase that we're going to just mention in a moment, and you may even have heard of a thing called Kantian ethics. And Kant's main premise was that if you need to use reason, if you can't arrive at an opinion without reason, then you shouldn't have that opinion. And I'm not saying I agree with any of these particular ethical methods of ethics, but you know what? I definitely align myself to that. So if I say, well, I believe this, I think I should be able to say why I believe it. Because I said so isn't good enough. It's not for me. And so I'm in line with Kant there. I definitely wouldn't call myself a genius, that's for sure. But I'm definitely in line with what he's saying there. Okay. And he came up with this term called a categorical imperative. And basically what it means is, under no circumstances, you can't think of a circumstance when this doesn't apply. And he famously talks about, well, different things. One of the things that he talks about is lying. And in order for Kant, what he says, well, some things are just wrong, or and you must always do them. And what he says was, these things, for you to say these are categorical imperatives, then what you must say is that it is a universal law. Don't think of rules that are categorical if they are not, if you don't believe that they should be for everybody. Everybody must think, everybody must follow the maxim, that's what he's saying there, and therefore don't make rules if they're not universal, so they're not they're not for everybody at all times. And so an example of that, and you may even have heard it, and I hear this lots of times, is this concept of what's known as the golden rule. Now, the golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that sometimes translates, sometimes I hear people on sites or whatever, and the standard answer is, well, do you know what? I wouldn't ask anyone to do something I wouldn't do. So I think it's obviously not exactly the same as this. And I always respond to that and say, well, okay, what if what you do is unsafe? What if what you do isn't appropriate? Would you really want other people to do that? Is everybody as capable or as you? Maybe some people are not as physically strong or as experienced or whatever that may be. Now, when you look at the golden rule, it may on the face of it seem quite reasonable. But remember what Kant said. Kant said rules must be, if it's a rule and you must always follow it, it's got to be universal. And it's got to be for everyone at all times. So you can look how the golden rule isn't universal. There are times where maybe I'd do something that wouldn't be right for you. So, you know, and I'm sure we can think of examples there. Okay, moving on. So just a little cartoon there. You may have come across this yourselves in your businesses. And we've got the chap on the stairwell there, and I don't know if you can see on the right-hand side, it's saying, hold the handrail, and he's saying, well, I don't need to hold the handrail because I'm the big cheese. I'm brilliant at what I do. I'm really good at this. I'm really good at that. So I don't need to follow the rules. This is called moral exceptionalism. And you may have come across it. And it's a particular view which is a real challenge. And sometimes you can get people who are in a position of authority. And they may say, well, because I'm whoever I am, I don't need to follow the rule. And if you start to have a workplace where you've got that, it will undermine the moral authority of the organisation or of the senior management. And we can see this with what happened with the Dominic Cummings chap, the guy who went to Cumbria, wherever he went to, Durham or whatever. Whether he did the right thing or the wrong thing, I'm going to make no comment on that. But you can see how people reacted very emotionally towards that. Well, if he can do that, why should I do this? And in the workplace, when we're talking about health and safety, it's really difficult sometimes, and I know it is for you, to get people to follow the rules. If they feel that the organisation has lost its moral authority, then that will make it even harder for you. So philosophy is actually playing a part in your day-to-day running of your department or your health and safety practice or whatever it is that you're doing. Okay. And the big problem that we've got there is once I don't have to follow this rule, what other rules don't I have to follow? So the problem that we've got here when we look at Kant, categorical imperative, we look around us and we see I can see lots of businesses who say, right, anyone who doesn't follow the rule is in trouble. But okay, well, is that the same for other rules then? If you're going to punish me or penalise me or whatever that looks like in the workplace, and you're saying because you didn't follow the rule, and the rule is a categorical imperative, if there's any other cases where people have not followed the company's rules, you've undermined your moral authority, and all of a sudden people won't take you seriously. We're going to move on to our next method of looking at ethics, and it's one called utilitarianism. And so I'm sure many of you have heard of this. And so it's based on this premise. It's based on the fact that, the opinion that all human beings ultimately want to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So the idea behind utilitarianism is that whatever you do, it should be to increase pleasure and avoid pain. And the two most well-known modern utilitarians were two chaps called Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. One was a Scotsman. No, they were both English, actually, I think. And they both they have two slightly different versions of utilitarianism. And they talked about this concept. So to decide whether something was good, we needed to look at its principle of utility. So should we do this thing? It wasn't about whether it's right or wrong, it's about its consequences. So if we do this thing and we get lots of good consequences for lots of people, we should do it, irrespective of what it is. Even if it's something which other people may think, that's not really a very good idea, that. You shouldn't really do that. A utilitarian or a classical utilitarian would say, well, it benefits more people, so therefore we should do it. Okay. There were very much both the utilitarians there that we mentioned there, Mill and Bentham. They believed that any of the theories should apply to everybody equally. So because you were more wealthy or more intelligent or taller or shorter or anything different, it's equally applicable to you as everybody else. Okay. They were saying that we always need to act in the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And we can think of circumstances where actually individuals may be harmed by something, but it benefits lots of other people. So maybe if a person carried out some work in an unsafe way, so we got the job done on time, It might mean that the company would make more money and therefore or would have less penalties or something like that. So that would be a mindset that somebody may approach, say, well, we understand you're taking risk, but it helps everybody else in the end, so let's do it. Okay. But what we need to remember is when we're looking at utilitarianism, you can't measure it in the benefit that it gives to me. And so what they say is that we should we should look at utilitarianism from the point of view of being, and I quite like this phrase, a benevolent spectator. Imagine somebody had come to you and asked your advice. And so you have no benefit, there's nothing that you get out of whether they choose to do A or B or whatever. What advice would you give them? And that's what the branches of utilitarianism by Bentham and by Mill is what they were saying. So you can't choose something that benefits just you. You can't do that. You've got to imagine what's the greater good to everybody rather than just you. Okay, so moving on. So we've got another quiz question for you now, and hopefully Ben's going to chuck that out there for you. Not a quiz question, poll question, sorry. And we look at a basic thing that we need to, that we're going to have a little look at here. Is it morally acceptable to tell a lie? And you might have different views, and Ben and I had a conversation, and I'll try not to influence your answers here. So I won't tell you what Ben said. Maybe I've already said that. Anyway, but can it ever be morally acceptable to tell a lie? Now, we're not saying, have you ever told a lie? We're not saying that. We're just asking you, morally, is it okay to tell a lie? So hopefully you can answer as honestly as possible, whatever that means, whether that be yes or no, and we'll come up with your answer there. And when you've done this, we're going to watch a little film, just a short cartoon, which pits two different types of, aspects of ethical theories against each other. And we're going to do that. So hopefully we're going to get some results pretty soon. Right, okay. Well, blinking out, can you believe it? 50-50. So just remember what answer you gave, whatever that was. But wow, that's brilliant. Right down the middle. Okay, so I'm just going to close that now, and we're just going to watch a film, and there'll be another question for you in a moment. So it's known as Kant's axe.
If a sinister-looking man carrying an axe knocked on your door and asked you where your best friend was, would it be morally acceptable to tell a lie?
So we're going to vote again now. Obviously, we've now given you a context which we can all align to, because we've seen this circumstance, and Kant gave this as a thought experiment. When they come up with these kind of weird sort of examples, they call them thought experiments, and we use them within philosophy to test our theories. And some of them are, are very unusual things, that they'll come up with. You may have heard of things like the brain in the vat and things like that. But okay, let's see how we're getting on. Obviously, it's going to be 50-50, the same as what it was before. So yeah, let's see how you're going to get on. I'm interested to see how you get on now. See if you've changed your opinion at all. So in the context that we've got the guy with the axe. And he's saying, right, okay, where's your pal? Is it morally acceptable to tell a lie there? Okay. Now we're coming on. We're going to get our scores. Oh, hold on a minute. It's changed. Okay. You see, because the question's still the same. Is it morally acceptable to tell a lie? The question isn't, is it acceptable to tell a lie in these circumstances? That's not the question. And this is what we sometimes do when we think about morals. We move them to fit the situation that we've got. So let's watch the rest of the film. Let's see what Immanuel Kant thought. We want this one.
Immanuel Kant surprisingly, thought it wouldn't. The example of the would-be murderer is his. Tell the truth is what Kant called a categorical imperative, an absolute duty, one without exceptions. It applies to everyone, whatever the consequences. In fact, Kant argued that if you told a lie which, by chance, led to the axeman finding your friend, that would be on your conscience. So if you tell the axeman that your friend is not in the house when he is, and your friend then sneaks out the back door and bumps into the axeman, anything that then happens is, to some extent, your responsibility. But if you told the truth, then the consequences for your friend, no matter how grisly, should not be on your conscience. This brings out how different his moral stance was from utilitarianism, the philosophy that you should do whatever brings about the greatest happiness. A utilitarian would think about the consequences of telling the truth or of lying. In contrast, for Kant, some actions were just wrong, even if good consequences might flow from them. This is known as a deontological approach to ethics.
So you can see there quite a different approach, haven't we? And I did find it quite interesting the way that we've gone. Let me see if I got my maths right. We've had 31% who said, oh no, you mustn't lie, it's morally unacceptable, who are quite happy to lie in that set of circumstances. So it tells me that your morals are movable. Because, and we often talk about people, well, they should have done this, they're a bad person, they did that. Well, 31% of the group we've said today, you just moved your morals. And it's not unusual for people to do that. It's not unheard of, because you've moved your ethical standpoint. You've changed what you thought was right and what you thought was wrong. Oops, we don't want that. Move on. Okay, so what we've covered there, very, very briefly, we've covered two different broad categories of ethics. And the first one is what we call is teleological. And so there it's about the rightness or the wrongness of the action. So it's about the consequences, really. Doing, what outcomes is it going to give us? So if you remember in the virtue ethics, we had virtue in the middle, we had vices on one end, and we had vices on the other end, vices of excess, vices of deficiency. And we had utilitarian, Bentham and Mill were telling us, well, it's about the outcomes, really. That's what we're really interested about. And the greatest good for the greatest number of people is what we should do. But Kant was talking about this categorical imperative. Under no circumstances must you do anything different. And I'll give you an example of how that worked for me when I was in the fire service. I'll try and be quite brief. Got a little bit more to do yet. I'll try and be quite brief. And so when you go into a building, so say when I was a firefighter and was wearing breathing apparatus, if you go into a building and maybe it's a house and you would expect to find numerous numbers of people in there, the first person you find, whether it be an adult, child, whatever it may be, that's the person you rescue. You might think, well, there's more people over there and I can go and do this and I can go and do that. No. The rule is, and it's deontological approach to ethics, you're the first person I've found. I have a quick scoot around, obviously make sure there's nobody nearby, and you're the one I'm going to rescue. And I'm going to come out. And you never change that rule. That's the rule that you're taught. And whatever the outcomes, you've followed that rule, and that has helped me on so many occasions. I did what I believed to be right. I came across somebody, I brought them out, irrespective of whatever else happened. I did the right thing. And I must admit, that did help me in my career. Okay, moving on. So one of the questions that I very briefly want to talk about is, why do we believe, and is there a moral obligation for people in the workplace to follow rules? Why should we do that? I mean, if we start off from a starting point that we are all, as Rousseau said, man is born free and lives his life in chains, lives his life in chains. So basically, we've all got the choices. We've all got this choice to decide how we want to, whether we want medical attention or whether we want this or whether we want that. We have this fundamental right to choose. So why do we believe that people should follow, I've got an obligation to follow work rules? Now, one of the problems we've got in our industry is very little philosophy, and to be honest, quite a small amount of psychology has been, I mean, some has, but quite a small amount has been researched and thought about in terms of what we do, laws and rules within the workplace. So we're going to have to borrow ideas. The way I look at it, I'm going to borrow ideas and kind of, you know, sort of tweak them and give them a bit of a shape to see what it looks like in terms of health and safety. And in the picture that you can see there, that's Socrates. And the idea was Socrates was sentenced to death by the Athenian state. And Plato wrote a little book about this, a little dialogue, where this chap called Crito went and talked to Socrates and said, come on, Socrates, you don't have to follow the rules. Come on, we can get you out of here. You don't have to, we can save your life. And Socrates talks to Crito about that, about why he should follow the rules and why he believes that if he did abscond from Athens, why it would be immoral and why he had a moral obligation to follow these rules. And his three main rules, the three main reasons that are covered in Crito is that is the freedom to leave. Okay, so the idea behind that is if you don't like the rules here, so if Socrates didn't like the rules, of which he was found guilty of, he should have left earlier. He's not going to hanging about until, you know, you've got caught doing something that the state didn't like. So if you don't like what it is that we say here, go somewhere else. Another one, the second one we've got on our list there is contract. Well, very few of us have actually signed a contract to say that we will follow the rules of the land in which we live in, but we have signed a contract at work, most of us. And I'm going to go into that in a bit more depth in a minute. Okay, so benefits. So Socrates said, well, whilst I lived in Athens, I received benefits from Athens. So, for example, security, protection, running water, the ability to vote, education for the children, etc. So I've had these benefits, and because I've had them, I have to follow that. There are my obligations to follow the laws or the rules. Okay. Now, two British philosophers, John Locke on the left-hand side there, and David Hume, a famous Scottish philosopher, they also looked at this and found out and explored why we believe we have a moral obligation to follow rules. And Locke talked about consent. Locke says that, well, to think that you would follow a rule that you haven't consented to is absurd, especially as we're all born free. He was talking about this natural law. We're all born free, but simply by being within the boundaries of the country, you are giving what he called tacit consent to follow the rules. So I never said I would do this or I would do that. I haven't explicitly or expressly consented to follow the rules of the land, but I have tacitly done so because I'm within the boundaries of the country. Okay. Now, David Hume thought this was stupid. He thought it was a silly idea. He said, well, okay, how can I agree to something if I don't even know what I've agreed to? How can I do that? How could you expect somebody who has, by accident, stumbled into the land across the border to realise you're in a new land and there's loads of new rules and then say, well, simply because you're here, you will agree to them. Now, we're going to have a look at this in relation to health and safety in a moment. David Hume said that we have a moral obligation to follow laws and rules. And he said because if you don't, you're going to have negative consequences. You're going to get in trouble. You might get locked up, you might be fined or whatever it is that you've done. And if we look at that in terms of health and safety, we might get hurt. We might injure ourselves or maybe even injure other people. Now, I don't disagree with David Hume. I think David Hume's right. I think there is definitely a reason to follow rules are because of consequences. Yeah, definitely. But I don't think that's a moral reason. That's a practical reason, isn't it? If I do that, I'll hurt myself. If I do that, I'll get in trouble. I will get prosecuted. That's got nothing to do with whether I believe morally whether I should or shouldn't do that thing. So I think there was problems with both their views of moral obligation. So we'll just confirm exactly what we mean between the differences between tacit and express consent. So tacit consent is because I didn't say, oh, I'm not going to do that, it implies that I've consented to do it. So let's think about this. You may do a safe system of work, or you might have written a SOP or something like that. And simply because I didn't tell you, I'm not going to follow that rule, it means I've agreed to follow the rule. But that doesn't make any sense. And we'll look at a thing in a minute called hypothetical consent. We'll explore that a bit more. Now, express consent is this. I have said to you, I will follow the rule. And I think that we have an opportunity to explore this within health and safety. And I'm going to go on to that in a bit more in a minute. You said this is the rule, and I've said, well, do you know what? I'm going to follow it. And if I can't follow it, I'll tell you. And I've signed, or I've said, I've guaranteed, I've given you my promise that I'm going to do that. Now, there's another type of consent, and it's called hypothetical consent. So the idea is we will look at something after it's happened, and we'll say, well, any reasonable human would agree to consent to that, to follow that safe system of work, and or to avoid doing this work. Because if they were normal, reasonable, that's what any normal, reasonable person would have done. So we would assume that you consented to it. And when I hear people talk like that, they normally finish the sentence with this word, idiot. Now, there is a problem with this hypothetical consent, because what we're doing is we're saying, in hindsight, because a person would have been able to foresee that they would have been harmed, and a normal, reasonable person therefore wouldn't have done that. And they never told us there was a problem. So there's this type of hypothetical consent. So I just want to look at this in a bit more depth. I believe, from a health and safety point of view, I think we should talk more about contract. I've started doing this in some of the training that we talk about. I've done all that. Well, if you fall from height, you break your leg, or you'll do this, you'll do that. So don't do it. And when people go, yeah, whatever. Yeah, they do. But over the last probably about 2 years now, I ask people this. I say, why do you believe you have a right not to choose the safe system of work? Where have you got some moral right to decide not to do what you're being paid to do? I pay you to do A, B, and C, and I'm going to give you X amount of money and X amount of terms and conditions, holiday pay, whatever that may be. And because I give you that, I'm going to give you that so that you will work in the way that I would like you to work. And if you can't work in that way, or you don't want to work in that way, tell me. I don't think we use our contracts enough. I think we should. And I think we need to talk about it when we're having our appraisals, and we need to actually sign it in relation to health and safety. So that's where the contract of employment comes in. Another thing that we can consider as well is a contract amongst employees, amongst the groups. And I haven't really got time to talk about this in any great detail, but I've used this as well. I've used it in terms of a concept called permission granted, which I've used. And it's been really useful in some businesses where you get the group of people to agree to behave in a certain way, and they form a contract underlying their acceptable behaviours. Okay, we're coming up to nearly 46 minutes or something. So thank you very much for your time today. I think Ben's going to do some questions, so hopefully I can sort of work through some of them with you. We've got another question now, I think, Ben, haven't we? I don't know if you can hear me. And that's about whether, Ben, are you okay to put the final question up? Is that okay? Is he there? There we go. Would you be interested in exploring morals, ethics, or applied philosophy in more depth? So I'd be interested to know whether you think it would be something worthwhile. There are so many things I wanted to talk about today, but we just can't because we just didn't have enough time. And And I believe that in our profession, we need to open our minds to the concepts of philosophy and learn some of the lessons that some of these incredibly great thinkers and the ways of thinking, such as critical thinking, Socratic reasoning, and we should use that to help us be better at what our profession, obviously, and that's trying to keep people safe and healthy. So, be interesting to see what your results are here. Just it's like the Eurovision Song Contest, so yeah, let's just wait for that. Okay. Whilst we're waiting for the answers, I just well, that's great. That's really cool. What I've done is, whether it's me or anyone else, it doesn't really matter. But I've just put those of you who may be new to health and philosophy. There's just a couple of books there which could be good starting ones. Nigel Warburton's brilliant. He writes the philosophy in a way which I find just like telling stories, really, which is really cool. And Simon Blackburn is a bit more in depth, but again, brilliant, great writers, and the hopefully, if anybody would like to know any other suggestions, I can suggest other things as well. Just send us an email or whatever. Just send something to IOSH. Ben, are you there? I don't know. Are we going to go through some questions? Is that how it's going to work? Do I stop screen share now?
Yeah, so no, that's fantastic. And we do have some questions that have come in. So I'm going to make a start on going through those questions now, because we've got 10 minutes to go through these. So hopefully that'll be plenty of time. The first question for you, it refers to the golden virtue that you mentioned early on in the webinar. And this person simply just asked, so what is the measure of the golden virtue?
So we're talking in the middle now of virtue ethics. The golden mean, I think, is maybe what we're referring to. So it's when you just get it right. It's when you use your experience and you go, do you know what? I'm not going to be too courageous. I'm not going to run away. I'm going to do just the right amount. And there is no universal measure. Measuring ethics can be quite a challenge. Bentham tried to do it with, assigning scores to various ethical behaviours, utilitarian behaviours, and it's very difficult. It's just that, that person, when you meet them and you think, they cracked it, they've got it, they know what they're doing, they just seem to get it right. That is really unscientific, isn't it, that answer? But that's what Aristotle was talking about. He says you'll know when you get it right.
Excellent. Okay, so some of that, when you did the first part of the video earlier, this person asked, it kind of comes back to the question: Are we referring to morally? Is it the conscious decision to say it, or what is logical?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Good question. Now, Kant would say that a categorical imperative of not telling a lie is not based on an emotion. It's based on reasoning. And so I'll give you an example of where he expands this. He says that if we lived in a society where we didn't know if people were telling lies or not, society would break, and it just wouldn't function. And so it is a fundamental principle that all people should tell the truth at all times. He believed that if we didn't tell the truth at all times and we told people lies, actually we would be stealing from them. We would be stealing their ability to make a decision, because the decision that they would be making would be based on untruths. And so he felt that that was a really negative thing. And that's why he said telling the truth was a categorical imperative. He saw it as the whole of society would break without it. I don't know if that's answered it.
Well, I mean, if it hasn't, obviously the delegate who asked it can obviously forward on any further comments they want to add to that. But I think that was pretty comprehensive. So again, with regards to the video, so the second part of your video, and this person's made a comment here, which I just want to sort of pick your brains on, really. And he's pointed out that the second video poses a slightly different question due to the actual nature of its video.
It's actually the same video. let me see if I can understand the question that the person was saying. He was saying that the question is a different. It's actually the same video. Stop.
I think it. Yes, I suppose it relates to the question that we asked on the poll. That being that obviously we asked the same question twice, but we watched a video in between that.
Yeah.
And basically, the nature of what he's trying to suggest is that the nature of the actual question itself changes having watched the video.
Yeah, but it doesn't change whether something's morally right or wrong, according to Kant. According to Kant, the consequences are irrelevant. The circumstances are irrelevant because it's a categorical imperative not to tell lies. That's what Kant was saying. So remember, I am not saying whether it's right or wrong. I'm just using that video to represent Kantian ethics that said, irrespective of the consequences, telling lies is morally wrong. That's, like I say, this is not my opinion. This is based on Kant. And we see that by those people who maybe change their well, hold on a minute, I'm not going to tell a lie here because my mate's going to, get harmed by this. Yeah, but the question is still the same. Is it morally acceptable to tell a lie? That's the question. Not whether you would tell a lie, but whether it's morally acceptable.
Mm. And actually, someone else has interestingly wants to know whether you agree with this particular statement here. And this is the statement is telling truth is moral behaviour, but you could choose to tell a lie and act in an immoral manner. Hence, maintaining telling the truth is still moral behaviour.
I tell you what, that is a really good question. But what I'm not going to do is attempt to unpack it. I'm going to whoever sent that, I would like to read it, and because I'll be honest, it went in one ear and it went out the other, so I know that's not great.
That's fine. Well, what we'll do is we'll take that one offline. I can forward it on to you following the webinar for you to have a look at, and we can perhaps maybe put together a written response to that one.
There are elements of philosophy which, are bamboozling. They bamboozle me anyway. And you think, what are you trying to say? I don't get it. Some of it can be really complicated, but some of it isn't. And I'm not saying that question was or wasn't complicated, by the way. And some of it isn't. And what I want us to do is, I want us to stop thinking of philosophy as old blokes with white beards. I know I'm an old bloke, but I haven't got a white beard. It's not about that. Everybody is a philosopher. Everybody has an opinion of whether we should have an education system. Everyone has an opinion of whether something is right or wrong. If somebody jumps in the queue, everyone's got an opinion whether that's okay or not. That's philosophy. Everyone's a philosopher. And we need to start teaching our youngsters and thinking in this way. And only then can we really make decisions based on thoughts. And then I genuinely have no wish to influence anyone's thoughts. I just want them to think. What they think's up to them. But I just would like them to think. Any more questions, Ben?
There are, yeah. Someone here is so interesting to hear about the firefighters' approach. This is very much the polar opposite of triage. In what instances would a triage style approach be more appropriate? This is what we currently do in our return to work.
Yeah, what I'm not saying is on all occasions and everything that you do as a firefighter, would you use a deontological approach to ethics? I think to navigate ourselves through various workplaces and just through life, we may have some things which are absolute rules. Under no circumstances do I believe I'll do this. But there might be other things that, do you know what? I might use a utilitarian approach there. There might be other things that are underpinned by virtues. Well, I see myself as this type of person, and this is important to me, whatever that may be: humility, honesty, being courageous. And I don't think there's any one method. You mix them up, you do what you like. And so a triage, like you're saying there, so if you've got more than one casualty, then obviously you deal with whoever would be the most serious one first. I think that's what the person's talking about there. I don't know, you've got some really unconscious, you've got somebody with a bit of a bang on their elbow and someone who's bleeding, well, you kind of put them in a priority order, of course you would, yeah. So, yeah. So the thing is, I wasn't saying that always, under all circumstances, in every condition, you use a deontological approach to ethics. I was just giving you an example of something where, when you find the casualty, even if you think you could go and do something else, you bring them out. And that's just a rule. You just follow that. I'm not saying you follow every other rule, but you definitely follow that one.
Excellent. Okay, we do have some more questions, but we are coming to the end of time here, so I'm going to have to kind of call a halt on that. Thank you very much, Simon. I'm going to hand over to Jane to wrap up and conclude the session. So Jane, over to you.
Simon, thank you very much for sparking our interest in philosophy, ethics, morals, morality, a new way of thinking, stretching our minds, blowing our minds. I'm sure you'll have lots of interest, lots of people contacting you. Just to let everyone know, we've had 124 people participate in our very first webinar, so that's fantastic. Thanks to see everyone, the interaction with everyone. And our new format and way of connecting with people is, I think, really going to be the way forward. It's proved very successful across lots of other branches in IOSH, internationally as well. And I think we can use the basis of this to move forward into how we think about health and safety, and how we ourselves think about philosophy and morals and ethics. Thank you everyone for participating. We will be doing more webinars in the future. We have our programme of speakers lined up, and we know that the next two speakers are willing to do exactly the same, use this format of webinar. So you'll get information through IOSH, the usual methods of Connect and committee mailer and emails, etc. If you have any ideas of future topics or subjects you'd like to get involved with, or you'd like to help with presentations, then please get in touch. So wishing you all a very good evening. Thank you very much for sharing our first venture into virtual meetings. Wishing you all a safe and very well month. We'll see you in a month's time. Bye for now.